My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old. The sterile white of the hospital room swam before my eyes, blurring the edges of the IV drip, the hushed movements of the nurses. A dull ache throbbed in my lower abdomen, a constant reminder of the surgery I'd just endured. But the physical pain was nothing, an insignificant flicker compared to the gaping, freezing void where my heart should have been. "She's gone, Sarah." The nurse had said, her voice soft, laced with a pity that felt like acid on my raw nerves. "Your mother-in-law, she took the baby." No explanations, no elaborate story. Just those words delivered with a quiet finality that ripped through me. My baby. My newborn daughter, barely a day old, plucked from my side while I was unconscious, vulnerable, recovering from the very act of bringing her into this world. I closed my eyes, but the image seared into my eyelids, an empty bassinet, the tiny blankets folded neatly, a stark, mocking monument to absence. The scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils, mingling with a phantom scent of newborn, fresh and sweet, now a torment. I could feel the ghost of her weight in my arms, the phantom brush of her soft cheek against mine from the brief moments I held her before the world dissolved into the haze of anesthesia. How could this be? How could anyone take a baby from her mother, especially when that mother was barely clinging to consciousness after childbirth? My mind raced, a frantic, desperate hamster on a wheel. My mother-in-law, Eleanor. Her name tasted like ash in my mouth. I had always known she disapproved, always felt the chill of her judgment, but this was beyond disapproval, beyond malice even. This was an act of pure, unadulterated cruelty, a calculated strike at the most vulnerable moment of my life. I remember the conversation with the doctor before surgery, the quick, reassuring words about a routine procedure, the promise that my baby would be safe in the nursery. Safe. The word echoed hollow and mocking. I had trusted them, trusted the system, trusted naively, stupidly that basic human decency would prevail. But decency had been trampled underfoot, replaced by a ruthless ambition I hadn't truly grasped until now. My body felt heavy, anchored to the bed by the lingering effects of the anesthesia, but my spirit felt like it was thrashing, desperate to break free, to run to find her. The tears came then, hot and stinging, blurring the hospital room into an even more indistinguishable mess. They weren't gentle tears of sorrow, but jagged, angry tears of shock and disbelief. My baby. Gone. And I, her mother, was left here, helpless, empty, adrift in a nightmare that had only just begun. The whispers of my family outside the room, the hushed tones, the averted gazes, they all confirmed the unspeakable. They knew. They must have known. And I, Mackenzie Davis, 34 years old, sitting in the back row of courtroom 7, watching my sister Hazel being tried for drug trafficking, knew the searing pain of being the villain in their story, even as I had sacrificed everything. Growing up in Millfield, Michigan, a town so small it barely registered on maps, our house on Maple Street was a picture of deceptive perfection. White picket fence, neatly trimmed lawn flower boxes under the windows. But inside, my parents, Caroline and Richard Davis, were more like ghosts than guardians. Mom, a receptionist at the local dental practice, would come home, mix a gin and tonic, and disappear into her bedroom. Dad, a construction worker, was either working late or silently glued to the TV, a fortress of beer cans rising around him. I learned to cook at 7 simple things like sandwiches and canned soup because no one else would. By 9, I was doing laundry cleaning and making grocery lists. My parents provided for necessities, but everything else fell to me. I became an adult long before I should have. When I was 11, Mom announced she was pregnant again. It wasn't planned, and they didn't seem happy, but I was ecstatic. A baby sister. Someone to love, someone who would love me back. I decorated the spare room with secondhand baby items, read every parenting book. I was more prepared for Hazel's arrival than our parents. Hazel was born on a rainy Tuesday in April, tiny, with dark hair and bright blue eyes. The moment I held her, a fierce protectiveness surged through me. This little person would have the childhood I never had. I would make sure of it. My parents' already minimal interest in parenting diminished further with Hazel. Mom suffering from what I now recognize as untreated postpartum depression, and dad avoiding the crying baby by working longer hours. By 6 months old, I was handling midnight feedings, changing diapers, and singing lullabies. School became my sanctuary and challenge. I maintained straight A's, seeing education as my ticket out, but I rushed home daily to care for Hazel. Teachers noticed, but I made excuses, afraid the truth would separate me from her. As Hazel grew, our bond deepened. I taught her to read, tie her shoes, ride a bike. I helped with homework, kissed scraped knees, braided her hair for picture day, and sewed costumes. For all intents and purposes, I was her mother. Our financial situation was always precarious. Dad's employment was unstable and Mom's salary barely covered the mortgage. At 16, I got a job at the local diner, working weekends and evenings. Every penny went to Hazel's needs: new shoes, school supplies, birthday presents. One particularly bad winter, Dad was laid off for 3 months. The heating bill went unpaid. I used my savings to buy a small space heater for Hazel's room, and we'd huddle together reading stories under blankets. I told her we were having an adventure like explorers in the Arctic, and she believed me, her eyes wide with excitement. The emotional toll was immense. While other teenagers went to parties and football games, I was budgeting groceries and helping with spelling tests. I cried myself to sleep many nights, overwhelmed by responsibility no child should bear, but I never let Hazel see my tears. To her, I was strong, capable, always smiling. When confronted about their neglect, my parents would deflect. "You're so good with her," Mom would say, as if that justified her absence. "She prefers you anyway," Dad would mutter, absolving himself. They convinced themselves my caretaking was a choice, not a necessity, and my maturity innate, not forced. As Hazel approached school age, her future concerned me deeply. I was her safety net. But what would happen when I left for college? The thought gnawed at me. I needed to create a better life for both of us. But how without abandoning her? It was the impossible dilemma that would eventually tear us apart. Despite the overwhelming responsibilities, I excelled academically. School was my escape and my hope. While Hazel napped or after she went to bed, I studied until my eyes burned, determined to create opportunities. Mrs. Bennett, my guidance counselor, was the first adult who truly saw me. During my junior year, she called me into her office after I'd fallen asleep in the library. "Mackenzie, you're one of the brightest students I've ever worked with," she said. "But you're running yourself into the ground. What's going on at home?" After years of secrecy, something in me broke. I told her everything: the neglectful parents raising Hazel since infancy, working weekends while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. Instead of calling social services, which I'd always feared, she listened. Then she helped me develop a plan. "You need to go to college," she insisted. "With your grades and circumstances, we can find scholarships. You can build a better future for both you and Hazel." Over the next year, Mrs. Bennett helped me apply to universities and for financial aid. When the acceptance letters came, I felt equal parts elation and dread. The University of Michigan offered a full scholarship to study political science and public policy, but accepting meant leaving Hazel with our parents. I spent weeks agonizing, crafting elaborate plans to ensure Hazel would be okay. I approached my parents with a formal proposal, like a business negotiation. "I'll only go if you promise to take proper care of Hazel," I told them, presenting a written agreement outlining basic parental duties. "I'll send money home from my campus job. I'll call every Sunday to check in, and if I find out you're neglecting her, I'll come back and take legal action." They seemed offended but agreed. Mom even showed a flicker of pride about my scholarship. Preparing Hazel was heartbreaking. She was 7 then, with gap-toothed smiles and endless questions. "Why can't I come with you?" she asked, her blue eyes welling. College is just for big people, I explained. But I'm doing this for us. When I finish school, I'll get a good job, and then we can live together, just you and me. You promise? I promise, Hazelnut, and I'll call you so often you'll get sick of my voice. The day I left for Ann Arbor was the hardest of my life. I'd packed Hazel's favorite stuffed animals, written notes for her, and programmed my number into the phone I'd bought her with my savings. Still leaving her felt like having my heart torn from my chest. University life was a culture shock. My roommate complained about her parents calling too often while I structured my entire schedule around my weekly calls with Hazel. Other students spent money on pizza and parties. I worked 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, sending half my earnings home. During those Sunday calls, Hazel initially sounded okay talking about school and friends, but as months passed, the calls grew shorter. She seemed distracted, less eager to talk. When I asked to speak to our parents, they were brief and dismissive. She's fine, Mackenzie, stop hovering. I threw myself into my studies, discovering a passion for public policy. My professors noted my unique perspective on social services and family support systems. Dr. Harmon, a political science professor, became a mentor, encouraging me to consider a career in government. You understand the real impact of policy decisions on families, he said. That's something many politicians lack. By my junior year, I'd secured an internship with a state senator. The experience opened my eyes to how I could create systemic change. I began to envision a career path that would allow me to help children and families like ours. Each semester break, I rushed home to Hazel. Each time she seemed more distant. Our parents had enrolled her in activities that conveniently scheduled practices during my visits. When we did have time, she mentioned offhand comments our parents had made. Mom says you left because you wanted freedom from us. Or, Dad said college was more important to you than family. I tried to counter these narratives, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. After one particularly difficult visit during my senior year, I overheard my mother on the phone with a relative. Mackenzie abandoned her responsibilities. We're left raising the child she promised to care for. The accusation stung like a physical blow. I confronted her immediately. How dare you say I abandoned her? Everything I've done has been for Hazel. If that were true, you wouldn't have left, she replied coldly. You chose yourself, Mackenzie. At least be honest about that. No matter how I explained the narrative was established, I had failed Hazel by pursuing my education. The irony was crushing. The very path I'd taken to secure our future was being used to paint me as selfish and neglectful. As graduation approached, I made plans to bring Hazel to live with me once I secured a job and apartment. I had kept my promise and never wavered, but I didn't realize how thoroughly my family had rewritten our story, or how deeply Hazel had internalized their version. The foundation for our eventual estrangement had been carefully laid brick by brick during those 4 years I spent trying to build us a better life. I graduated with highest honors, secured a position with the state government in Lansing, and found a small but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment. Everything was in place for Hazel to join me, just as I'd always planned. I drove to Millfield the weekend after starting my job, eager to finally fulfill my promise. When I arrived at our childhood home, the atmosphere was immediately tense. Mom and Dad acted as if my visit was an inconvenience. Hazel, now 11, barely looked up from her phone. Hey, Hazelnut, I said, using my old nickname. I've missed you so much. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Whatever. The sullen preteen bore little resemblance to the loving sister I'd left behind. I attributed it to normal adolescent moodiness and tried again. I've got your room all set up in my new place. You'll have your own bathroom, and there's a park right across the street. Finally, she looked up, confusion crossing her face. What are you talking about? About you coming to live with me. Remember, that was always the plan. Hazel looked at our parents, who suddenly seemed very interested. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. My friends are here. My school is here. Mom stepped in, placing a protective hand on Hazel's shoulder. Mackenzie, you can't just disappear for 4 years and then expect to uproot Hazel's entire life because it suits your schedule now. Disappear, I called. I called every week I sent money. I came home every chance I got. A phone call isn't the same as being here, Dad interjected. Hazel needed stability, not promises from hundreds of miles away. I was stunned. They had completely rewritten history, casting me as the deserter rather than the provider. Worse, Hazel clearly believed them. Over the next several days, I tried repeatedly to reconnect with my sister. I showed her photos of her room, told her about the school near my place, even offered to get her a dog. Nothing broke through her wall of resentment. During a rare moment alone, I asked her directly, "Hazel, what did they tell you about why I went to college?" She looked at me with cold eyes I barely recognized. That you were tired of taking care of me, that you wanted a normal life without a kid sister dragging you down. My heart shattered. That's not true. I went so I could make a better life for both of us. Then why didn't you take me with you? I couldn't. Dorms don't allow children. I had no money, no way to support us. Yet you just didn't want me. She insisted, years of manufactured resentment hardening her voice. It's fine. I don't need you anymore. Before leaving, I confronted my parents, my voice shaking with rage and grief. How could you poison her against me after everything I did for her, for this family? Mom's response chilled me. We simply told her the truth, that when you had the choice between responsibility and freedom, you chose freedom. You failed the child. They didn't want Mackenzie. We've had to pick up your slack. They, I echoed, catching the slip. You mean the child you didn't want? I was the only one who ever wanted her. Dad stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. You should leave. Hazel's better off without your inconsistency in her life. I tried to maintain contact after that disastrous visit, regular calls, letters, birthday, and Christmas gifts. Most went unanswered or were returned. When Hazel did pick up my calls, our conversations were brief and strained. As the years passed, our communication dwindled to almost nothing. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned troubling things. Hazel had started skipping school, been caught drinking at 14. By 16, she was running with a crowd known for drug use. I made emergency trips home whenever I heard she was in serious trouble. During one visit, when Hazel was 17, I found her high in her bedroom, pupils pinpoints from what I suspected was opioid use. You need help, Hazel? I pleaded. Let me get you into a program. I don't need your help, she slurred. Where were you when I actually needed you? I've always been here. I've been trying to reach you for years. Just go back to your perfect life and leave me alone. She's fat. That's what you're good at, right? Leaving. My parents had completely abdicated responsibility by this point. She won't listen to us, Mom said dismissively. This is what happens when children are abandoned by their primary caregiver at a formative age. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. They had recast themselves as the stable parents and me as the deserter when the opposite was true. And Hazel, young and impressionable when I left, had fully internalized their narrative. Our last major confrontation came shortly after Hazel's 18th birthday. I'd heard she'd dropped out of high school and was living with a known dealer. I drove to Millfield immediately and tracked her to a rundown apartment complex. The sister who opened the door was almost unrecognizable, thin to the point of gauntness, with hollow eyes and track marks visible on her arms. The apartment reeked of cigarettes and unwashed clothes. What do you want? She demanded. I want to help you, I said, fighting back tears. Please, Hazel, this isn't you. You don't know me. She laughed bitterly. You haven't known me since I was 7. That's not true. I've tried to stay connected. Mom and Dad don't blame them. They were at least there. You chose your career over me. Everyone in town knows how you failed me. I realized then how thoroughly my parents had worked to destroy my reputation in our hometown. According to their version spread to neighbors, teachers, and extended family, I had abandoned a child I'd promised to care for, leaving them to pick up the pieces of my irresponsibility. Hazel, I never stopped loving you. Everything I did was to create a better life for us. I don't want to hear it. She stepped back toward the door. I never want to see you again. You're not my family. You're nothing to me. The door slammed in my face, and with it any immediate hope of reconciliation. I sat in my car and sobbed until I had no tears left, then drove back to Lansing with a hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. I couldn't force Hazel to accept my help, but I wouldn't give up on her either. I set up a separate bank account in her name, depositing money monthly that she could access if she ever changed her mind. I kept tabs on her through distant connections, and I channeled my grief into my work, determined to create systems that would prevent other families from fracturing the way ours had. The pain of being branded a failure by the very people I had sacrificed everything for was almost unbearable, but I refused to let it define me. If I couldn't save my sister right now, perhaps I could help save others. After the devastating final confrontation with Hazel, I threw myself into my work at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. My entry-level position involved analyzing support programs for at-risk families, work that felt painfully relevant to my personal life. I approached my job with an intensity that surprised my colleagues. Where others saw statistics, I saw real families in crisis. Where others became bogged down in bureaucracy, I found creative solutions. My first-hand experience as a child caregiver gave me insights that my colleagues with social work degrees and fancy certifications lacked. Linda Garner, the department director, noticed my dedication after I proposed several innovative reforms to the foster care system. "You have a unique perspective, Mackenzie," she said. "You understand these issues from the inside out. Have you ever considered taking on a more public-facing role?" I hadn't, but Linda's encouragement sparked something in me. She became my first political mentor, introducing me to legislators and advocacy groups. Under her guidance, I developed policy proposals that gained attention across the state. One evening, at a fundraiser for family support services, I met State Senator James Wilson. After hearing me speak passionately about resource gaps for kinship caregivers, children raising siblings or grandparents raising grandchildren, he approached me. "We need more people who understand these issues firsthand," he said. "My legislative director is leaving next month. I'd like you to consider the position." Working for Senator Wilson elevated my platform. I drafted bills that expanded support for family caregivers, improved access to mental health services, and created early intervention programs for families in crisis. When these initiatives passed with bipartisan support, I began to see how political power could be used for meaningful change. Senator Wilson encouraged me to consider running for office myself. "You're young, smart, and genuinely care about people," he said. "That's a rare combination in politics." At 30, I launched my campaign for state representative in a district neighboring my hometown. I was a political newcomer facing a three-term incumbent, but my authentic connection to community issues resonated with voters. My campaign focused on strengthening family support systems, improving education, and addressing the opioid crisis devastating rural communities. I never explicitly mentioned my personal story on the campaign trail. The wound was still too raw, and I feared how my family might retaliate if I publicly contradicted their narrative. The local newspaper from my hometown ran a scathing profile quoting unnamed family friends who described me as ambitious and self-serving, someone who abandoned family responsibilities to pursue political aspirations. I recognized my parents' influence in those anonymous quotes, but chose not to respond directly. Instead, I let my policy proposals and genuine concern for constituents speak for themselves. To everyone's surprise, including my own, I won by a narrow margin. As a state representative, I established myself as someone who could work across party lines to achieve practical solutions. My legislation creating a pilot program for youth mentorship in areas with high addiction rates gained national attention when it showed promising results in reducing teen drug use. Other states began implementing similar models. After 2 successful terms, I set my sights higher a state Senate seat. The campaign was grueling with my opponent digging for personal scandals and finding none. My private nature became an asset. I had focused so completely on my work that there were no embarrassing photos or questionable relationships to uncover. The victory was decisive this time. As a state senator, my influence grew. I chaired the Health and Human Services Committee where I could directly shape policy affecting vulnerable families. My reputation as a pragmatic problem solver made me a valuable ally to the governor, who often sought my input on family and social services legislation. Throughout my political rise, I maintained a careful separation between my public and private lives. Few colleagues knew about Hazel or my estrangement from my family. Those who did were trusted confidants who understood my need for discretion. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was increasingly recognized as an authority on family support systems, while my own family remained fractured beyond repair. Each time I helped another family avoid the pitfalls that had claimed mine, I felt both satisfaction and a deep ache of personal failure. 4 years into my Senate term, Governor Lawrence announced he wouldn't seek re-election. Several party leaders approached me about running. "You've built a strong record," they argued. "Your approval ratings are consistently high. You connect with both urban and rural voters, and the state is ready for its first female governor." The prospect was daunting. Gubernatorial campaigns invite intense scrutiny, and I had always protected my private life. But the potential to enact change on a broader scale was compelling. After weeks of consideration, I announced my candidacy. The primary was competitive, but civil. The general election proved more challenging with my opponent questioning my lack of family photos in campaign materials. "What's candidate Davis hiding?" one attack ad questioned. "No husband, no children, no family references. Doesn't Michigan deserve a governor who shares our family values?" Rather than taking the bait, I redirected attention to policy. Michigan deserves a governor who understands that families come in all forms and need support, not judgment. The strategy worked. Voters responded to my authenticity and concrete plans rather than personal attacks. On election night, I became the youngest female governor in Michigan history, winning by a comfortable margin. As I took the oath of office, the cameras captured a moment that seemed triumphant to observers. Only I knew the hollowness behind my smile. At what should have been the pinnacle of achievement, there was no family in the audience cheering me on, no sister beaming with pride. The people who should have been closest were strangers to my success. I channeled that pain into my inaugural address without revealing its source. Too many Michigan families are struggling in silence. Too many children are carrying adult burdens. As your governor, I promise that no child in our state will face adult responsibilities alone. No family will fall through the cracks on my watch. My first major initiative as governor was creating the Michigan Family Resilience Program, providing comprehensive support for families in crisis and young caregivers shouldering adult responsibilities. The program included specialized counseling, respite care, educational support, and financial assistance, all the things that might have kept my own family intact. The program garnered national attention and became a model for other states. I was featured in major publications as an innovative leader addressing root causes of family trauma. The public saw a success story, a dedicated public servant improving lives across the state. No one knew that each night after the staff left and the mansion grew quiet, I would sit alone in my office staring at the only photo of Hazel I kept, the two of us at the lake when she was 6 before everything fell apart. No one knew that Michigan's celebrated governor cried herself to sleep many nights wondering where her sister was and if she was even alive. The ultimate irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. I had achieved extraordinary professional success, was respected and admired by constituents and colleagues alike, while being deemed a failure by the only people whose approval had ever truly mattered to me. Then came the day my carefully separated worlds collided in a courtroom, forever changing everything. I was reviewing education budget proposals when my chief of staff Rachel knocked and entered with an unusual expression, part concern, part hesitation. "Governor, there's something you should see." She placed a newspaper on my desk folded to a small article in the crime section. The headline punched the air from my lungs: "Millfield Woman Arrested in Multi-County Drug Trafficking Operation." Below it, a mugshot of Hazel Gaunt, hollow-eyed but unmistakably my sister. According to the article, Hazel had been caught transporting significant quantities of heroin and prescription opioids. She also faced fraud charges for using elderly victims' identities to obtain credit cards. The case was being handled in the Ingham County Courthouse in Lansing, just minutes from the governor's mansion. "Do you know her?" Rachel asked carefully. I nodded, unable to find words. "I'm so sorry," she said. "What do you need?" What I needed was impossible to turn back time to have my sister grow up with the love and stability she deserved to rewrite our family's history. What I could actually do was much more limited. "I need to attend the trial," I said finally quietly. "No official capacity." Rachel looked concerned. "The press will have a field day if they make the connection." "They won't make the connection unless someone tells them. We don't share a last name anymore. She's using our mother's maiden name. And no one expects to see the governor sitting in her regular courtroom." The trial was scheduled for the following week. I rearranged my calendar, citing personal matters for the cleared afternoon. On the appointed day, I dressed in my most nondescript outfit, dark slacks, a simple blouse, hair pulled back under a plain baseball cap, minimal makeup, and glasses I rarely wore publicly. The courtroom was modestly filled, a few reporters from local papers, court staff, other defendants' families. I slipped into the back row just as proceedings began, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain others could hear it. Hazel was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, handcuffs securing her wrists. She'd lost more weight, her cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows, dark circles ringing her eyes. At 25, she looked a decade older. I pressed my palm against my mouth to stifle a gasp. The charges were read: possession with intent to distribute, trafficking across county lines, identity theft, credit card fraud. Hazel stood impassively, her expression vacant. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, though the evidence outlined by the prosecutor seemed overwhelming. To my surprise, my parents were present, sitting near the front. They hadn't changed much. Dad a bit grayer, Mom a bit thinner, both wearing expressions of aggrieved martyrdom. When called to testify about Hazel's character and background, they painted themselves as devoted parents who had done everything possible for their troubled daughter. "We gave her every advantage," my mother claimed, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "But she fell in with the wrong crowd after her sister abandoned us." There, it was the familiar narrative, now part of court testimony. The prosecutor asked for elaboration. "Mackenzie was like a mother to Hazel from the beginning." Dad explained, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Then she left for college and never really came back. Hazel was devastated, started acting out. Nothing we did could fill that void." I dug my fingernails into my palms, fighting the urge to stand and shout the truth. The defense attorney seized on this narrative, suggesting Hazel's crimes stemmed from childhood trauma and abandonment issues. She wasn't a hardened criminal, but a victim of circumstances psychologically damaged by early attachment disruption. It was surreal hearing my family's distorted version of events presented as mitigating evidence in a criminal trial. More surreal was watching Hazel nod along, clearly having internalized this explanation for her life's trajectory. The proceedings continued with testimony from arresting officers and evidence presentation. I sat frozen, absorbing every detail, wondering how my bright, loving sister had fallen so far. A brief recess was called, during which I remained seated, afraid movement might draw attention. When court resumed, the judge, the Honorable Michael Thornton, a respected jurist I'd met at several state functions, began reviewing case notes. He glanced up occasionally, scanning the courtroom. During one such survey, his gaze passed over me, then snapped back, his eyes widening in recognition. I held my breath, praying he would maintain professional decorum and continue. Instead, he adjusted his glasses, stared more intently, and then uttered the words that would change everything. "Excuse me, but wait. You're the governor." The courtroom, previously filled with murmurs and shuffling papers, fell into absolute silence. Every head turned in my direction. A reporter dropped his pen. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. My parents swiveled in their seats, faces morphing from confusion to shock. Hazel, who had been staring at the floor, looked up sharply. Our eyes met for the first time in years. Recognition, confusion, and something unreadable flashed across her face. I stood, slowly removing my cap and glasses. There was no point in pretense now. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite my thundering heart. "I am." Judge Thornton cleared his throat, visibly collecting himself. "Governor Davis, this is unexpected. May I ask your interest in these proceedings?" Every eye remained fixed on me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the furious scratching of a reporter's pen. "The defendant is my sister, Your Honor." The collective gasp was audible. Flashbulbs erupted from the press section. My parents sat rigid with shock. Hazel's expression was unreadable, her eyes wide and fixed on me. "Order!" Judge Thornton commanded, banging his gavel. "No photographs in my courtroom." He turned to me. "Governor, this is highly irregular. Are you here in an official capacity?" "No, Your Honor. I'm here as Mackenzie Davis, Hazel's sister. Nothing more." The judge considered this, then nodded. "Would you like to approach the bench?" I moved forward through the now buzzing courtroom, aware of every step. As I passed my parents, my mother hissed, "What are you doing?" I ignored her, continuing until I stood before the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the disruption. I came to observe quietly." "I appreciate that, Governor, but your presence changes the complexion of these proceedings." He lowered his voice. "Does defense counsel know you're the defendant's sister?" "No. We've been estranged for years. Few people know of our relationship." Judge Thornton frowned thoughtfully. "Given these extraordinary circumstances, I'm calling a 30-minute recess. Counsel from both sides in my chambers immediately." He banged his gavel again. "Court is in recess." As court officers led Hazel out, she looked back at me, her expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been hope. In the hallway, reporters swarmed. My security detail, alerted to the situation, arrived to create a buffer. Rachel materialized at my side, crisis management mode activated. "Governor, we need to issue a statement," she urged. "Not yet," I replied. "This isn't a political situation, it's personal. I need to see this through first." When court reconvened, the energy was entirely different. Additional security had been posted. More press had arrived. Judge Thornton addressed the courtroom with stern authority. "What has occurred here today is unprecedented, but this remains a court of law. We will proceed with appropriate decorum. Governor Davis has indicated a desire to make a statement relevant to these proceedings. As this is an extraordinary circumstance, I will allow it." I approached the witness stand and was sworn in. Looking directly at Hazel, I began speaking. "My name is Mackenzie Davis. I'm the current governor of Michigan, but more relevantly, I'm Hazel Davis's older sister. I was 11 when Hazel was born. Our parents—" I glanced at Caroline and Richard, who glared back, "were functionally absent from the time Hazel was an infant. I was her primary caregiver. I fed her, bathed her, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, worked part-time jobs to buy her clothes and school supplies." The courtroom was utterly silent. When I was 18, I received a full scholarship to the University of Michigan. It was the only way I could eventually provide Hazel with the stable home she deserved. Before leaving, I set up support's financial arrangements, regular check-ins, plans to bring her to live with me after graduation. I paused, fighting to keep my voice steady. I called weekly. I sent money from my campus jobs. I visited whenever possible. During those 4 years, our parents systematically alienated Hazel from me. They told her I had abandoned her because I didn't want the responsibility. They told our community I had failed the child they didn't want. By the time I graduated and was established enough to provide a home for Hazel, she had been convinced I had betrayed her. Every attempt I made to reconnect was rejected. I reached into my purse and removed a folder, handing it to the court officer. These are financial records showing regular deposits I've made to an account for Hazel since I was 19. Bank statements documenting money I sent home during college. Phone records showing my weekly calls, many unanswered. Documentation of the apartment I leased with a bedroom specifically for Hazel, who was never allowed to live there. The defense attorney was frantically taking notes, clearly seeing a new strategy forming. The prosecutor looked conflicted. I'm not here to influence these proceedings inappropriately. Hazel must take responsibility for her actions, but the narrative that she was abandoned by a selfish sister who chose education over family is false. It's a fiction created to cover parental neglect and emotional abuse that has shaped both our lives. I turned to face Hazel directly. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped trying to reach you. Everything I've achieved has been hollow because you weren't there to share it. Tears streamed down Hazel's face. For the first time in years, she looked like the little sister I remembered, vulnerable, hurt, but present in a way she hadn't been during the earlier proceedings. The judge called another recess. This time, Hazel's attorney requested a meeting with the prosecutor. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted again. Several new witnesses had been hastily assembled: Hazel's former teachers, our old neighbor, Mrs. Lancaster, even my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Bennett. One by one, they corroborated my account. Mrs. Lancaster testified about seeing me walking Hazel to elementary school while I was still in high school myself, preparing her lunches, taking her to doctor appointments. Mrs. Bennett explained how I had structured my college choice around eventually providing for Hazel. My parents attempted to leave during this testimony, but the judge ordered them to remain. Their faces showed a mixture of fury and embarrassment as their carefully constructed narrative unraveled publicly. The prosecutor and defense attorney jointly approached the bench. After a brief conference, the prosecutor addressed the court. Your Honor, in light of new mitigating information and the defendant's willingness to cooperate with ongoing investigations, the state is amending the charges. We're dropping the most serious trafficking counts in exchange for a guilty plea to lesser possession and fraud charges, with a recommendation for a rehabilitation-focused sentence. Judge Thornton nodded. Ms. Davis, do you understand and accept these terms? Hazel, looking dazed but more present than before, nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The judge continued. Given these extraordinary circumstances and the defendant's lack of prior convictions, I'm inclined to consider alternative sentencing. Instead of prison time, I'm ordering enrollment in the state's intensive drug rehabilitation program, followed by supervised probation and community service. He looked directly at me. Governor, I trust this does not represent a conflict of interest. This program exists independently of your office's oversight. It does not, Your Honor. It was established under the previous administration. Very well. He turned back to Hazel. Miss Davis, you're being offered a chance many don't get. I strongly suggest you take it seriously. As the proceedings concluded, the media frenzy outside intensified. Rachel had arranged for a private exit and secure transport for both Hazel and me. As court officers prepared to lead Hazel away, our eyes met again. Can I talk to her? Hazel asked her attorney, who looked to the judge. Judge Thornton nodded briefly. In the conference room with officers present. In a small room adjacent to the courtroom, Hazel and I faced each other, the governor and the convicted drug offender, the sisters who had once been inseparable. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice raspy from crying. "Because you're my sister. That never changed." "Why didn't you tell anyone? Use your connections. You're the governor, for God's sake." "That's not how justice works. Hazel and I didn't want to make things worse for you with some kind of special treatment scandal." She shook her head in disbelief. "All this time, you've been... I saw you on TV sometimes. I told people in my halfway house my sister knew the governor. They thought I was delusional." A choked laugh escaped me. "Life is strange. Mom and Dad, they really lied about everything, didn't they? They rewrote our history to absolve themselves." Hazel wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I don't know what's real anymore. I've been so angry at you for so long." "I know. We have a lot to talk about if you're willing." She nodded slowly. I think I'd like that." An officer indicated our time was up. As Hazel was led away, she turned back. "Mackenzie, I'm sorry I said I never wanted to see you again." For the first time that day, I allowed my tears to fall freely. I'm just glad that wasn't true. Outside, the press clamored for statements. My parents had slipped away, already aware their version of events would no longer hold up to scrutiny. I faced the cameras briefly, Rachel at my side. Today, personal and public matters intersected in ways I never anticipated. I ask for privacy as my family navigates a difficult healing process. What happened in court today speaks for itself. As questions shouted around me, I added one final comment. Family trauma affects countless Michigan residents. It's why I've prioritized support systems for vulnerable. "Your 3 o'clock is here, Governor." I glanced at my watch. "Send her in, please." The door opened and Hazel entered. She looked dramatically different from the hollow-eyed defendant in the courtroom. Months in the state's premier rehabilitation facility had restored her physically. Her face had filled out, her complexion was healthier, and her eyes were clear. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. "Right on time," I said, smiling as I rose to greet her. "The punctuality they drill into us is intense," she replied with a small smile of her own. 5 minutes early is on time is late." "How was the drive with Thomas?" Thomas was the security officer I'd assigned to transport Hazel to our bi-weekly meetings. "Good. He's teaching me about basketball. Apparently, I should care about the Pistons." These moments of normal conversation still felt precious fragile. Our relationship was being rebuilt one careful brick at a time. I led her to the sitting area where tea was set up. These meetings had become our ritual, alternating between the governor's mansion, when my schedule was too tight, and the rehabilitation facility when I could make the drive. We had started with supervised visits, a counselor present to help navigate the emotional minefields. Now we met alone, though Hazel's therapy team was still heavily involved in her recovery. "How was group this week?" I asked, pouring tea. "Intense. We did family systems work." She added honey to her cup. "I talked about Mom and Dad a lot. Our parents had maintained radio silence since the trial. They'd moved to Florida shortly after, apparently unwilling to face the community now that their narrative had been publicly dismantled." "Have you heard from them?" I asked carefully. Hazel shook her head. "Not directly. Aunt Susan called. Said they're telling everyone I manipulated the system because of your position." I sighed. Some stories are too deeply entrenched to change. "I used to think you were the villain in our story," Hazel said quietly. "I built my entire identity around being the abandoned sister, and I built mine around being the sister who failed to protect you despite everything." These honest exchanges had become possible only recently. The first months had been harder, filled with tears, recriminations, and painful excavations of the past. Hazel had alternated between clinging to her old narrative and being overwhelmed by the truth. I had struggled with guilt for not finding some way to break through the walls our parents had built. My counselor says we were both victims of parental alienation, Hazel said. That's a real thing, apparently. Parents deliberately turning a child against the other parent or family member. I've been reading about it. I admitted it. It's helped me understand how they were so effective. I believed them because I needed to. Hazel said, insight from months of therapy evident in her voice. If what they said was true, at least it meant they wanted me, even if you didn't. The alternative was too painful that neither of you did. I never stopped wanting you in my life, Hazel. Never. She nodded, eyes damp. I know that now. We sipped our tea in comfortable silence. Through the window, snow fell softly on the mansion grounds. I have news, Hazel said eventually. The program director thinks I'm ready for the transition phase. I'll be moving to a halfway house next month. More independence, but still structured. That's wonderful. I meant it sincerely. Her progress had been remarkable. Where will the house be? That's the thing. She hesitated. There are options in different counties. I requested Ingham to be closer to here. The implication warmed me. She was choosing to be near me. I could help you find an apartment when you're ready, I offered. No pressure, but the option is there. Thank you. I'd like that. Our conversation shifted to lighter topics, a book Hazel was reading, legislation I was working on, a funny incident with her roommate at the facility. These normal exchanges felt like miracles after years of estrangement. As our meeting concluded, I walked her to the door. Next week at Lakeside, I asked, referring to the rehabilitation center. Yes. Oh, I almost forgot. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small wrapped package. It's not much, but I made it in occupational therapy. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple clay picture frame glazed in blue. It held a photo of us from 20 years ago. Hazel, about 5, me, 16, both smiling by the lake near our childhood home. I found it in my old things, she explained. One of the few photos I kept. My throat tightened. I have the same one. It's been on my desk at home all these years. Really? She looked genuinely surprised. Even when we weren't speaking. Especially then. We hugged goodbye, still somewhat awkwardly but with genuine affection. As Thomas escorted her out, I returned to my desk, placing the framed photo beside my computer. Later that evening, I made a decision I'd been contemplating for months. I called my chief of staff. Rachel, I want to formalize the Young Caregivers Initiative we've been discussing. Make it official next week. Excellent, she replied. What are we calling it? I thought for a moment. The Bridge Program. Because it creates connections where they're most needed. The Bridge Program became my administration's signature achievement: comprehensive support for children. Raising siblings or caring for parents, including counseling, academic assistance, respite care, and financial aid. It addressed the gaps that had fractured my own family, ensuring other young caregivers wouldn't face the same impossible choices. At the small private launch event held at the governor's mansion, Hazel stood quietly in the back of the room. Few people recognized her or understood her significance. As I concluded my remarks about the importance of supporting vulnerable families, our eyes met across the crowd. Her slight nod conveyed everything words couldn't. We weren't fully healed. Some wounds were too deep, some years too irrevocably lost. Our parents remained estranged, unwilling to acknowledge their role in our fractured past. But Hazel and I had found our way back to each other, rebuilding a relationship different from but no less meaningful than what we might have had. I had spent years believing I had failed the person who mattered most to me. Now I understood that the true failure would have been giving up on Hazel, on reconciliation, on the possibility that broken things can be mended even if the seams still show. As governor, I had the power to enact policies affecting millions, but the most profound change had happened in the quiet moments between two sisters finding their way back to the truth of their shared story.